guys, welcome to the Lone Star Trail. I'm out about a mile and a half into this little hike, and I'm looking for some a scene, some scenes, a scene, anything where I can demonstrate focus stacking. But it's not looking promising. This area burned, man, I think it was about 10 years ago, and it regrew pretty dense. A lot of underbrush. So I had hiked it just a little bit after the forest fire with my son, and I remember hiking through this section of it thinking that, you know, I wanted to get back to shoot some photos. Unfortunately, about 9 years later, I'm a little too late to capture the scenes that I had in mind. But anyways, we may have to just kind of make do with just anything I can find. But real quick, I wanted to talk about what kind of prompted this video. And I recently had a viewer reach out and had asked me about focus shift shooting. He watched my Montana video, and if you haven't watched it, I'll put a link up above. In part 2 of that video, I demonstrated manual focus stacking, and he had asked if I ever use focus shift shooting, the automated version that's in most Nikon Z cameras. And the answer to that question is sometimes. And it kind of depends on the scene, kind of depends on the subject matter, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But not always. So I started thinking this video actually was on my to-do list, and so I bumped it up a little bit since people are asking questions about it. And by the way, that's kind of how it works. You guys kind of drive the videos that you see on this channel. So if you leave a comment down below, I will read it and I'll respond. And if you're requesting a video, I'll add it to the list. And sometimes it gets bumped up like this guy's. So also, if you're responding to a comment within a comment, by the way, I don't see those easily. They don't pop up to where I get notifications. So if you are responding to a comment within a comment, and I don't get back to you, on my website, there's a link down in the description, but on my YouTube web page, in my website, there's actually a comment form where you can shoot me a question or a request or what have you directly, and it shows up in my email inbox. So that's a good way, if I'm not responding in the comments section, to get a hold of me. I do read all the comments that I see, and I appreciate all you guys that are out there asking questions and whatnot. Anyways, enough rambling about that. So essentially, I'm going to try to find a foreground and a scene that is conducive to focus stacking, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as we hike along. So let's go. So why do we want to focus stack? I have a lot of, not a lot, but I've had a few questions on, why you need to focus stack in landscape photography. And there's a few reasons. Probably the biggest reason is that you can't get your foreground subject and your background subject sharp enough with a single frame. Your depth of field is going to be the greatest when you're focused at the hyperfocal distance for that particular lens, at that particular aperture, in that particular focal length. And if your subject is really close to the lens, you know, and this is dependent upon many things, but let's just say we're shooting with a 24mm lens and we have maybe a group of flowers in the foreground, beautiful lake in the midground, and then some amazing mountains in the background. We're not going to get that here today, but let's just say that's what we're shooting. If you focused on the flowers, then your background would be out of focus. If you focused on the mountains, then your foreground, your flowers, would be out of focus. So that's a situation where focus stacking comes into play, and we would want to shoot a series of images with varying focus going throughout the scene, and then merge those together. So that's why a landscape photographer would focus stack. Macro photographers focus stack as well, using, you know, slide rails and whatnot. But the other reason to focus stack is to get the very sharpest image possible. And typically when I'm shooting landscapes, I'm shooting at f11, maybe f16, and that's not my sharpest aperture for any lens that I own. Typically, your sharpest aperture is 1 to 2 stops down from wide open. So for today, I have my 24 to 120 Z lens, which is an f4, and let's just say I'm not sure exactly, it's probably sharpest at 2 stops, but don't hold me to that. But we'll say for today it is. And so that would be, 1 stop would be 5.6, 2 stops is f8. I'm going to focus stack at my sharpest aperture so that, you know, my final product is the absolute sharpest I could get. So, so there's a few reasons why you want to focus stack. And anyway, we'll talk about the difference between manual focus stacking and automatic or focus shift shooting here in a bit. Hopefully, I'm 3.5 miles and no luck. So we may just be photographing the trail, but anyway, we'll see. Okay, so when do I manually focus stack and when do I let the camera do it automatically for me? And that is a good question. And essentially it comes down to what the conditions are where I'm shooting. Earlier, I'm not sure if it made it into the video or not, I was talking about this beautiful mountain scene that we came across with wildflowers in the foreground, beautiful lake in the midground, and then our mountains in the back. And we want it sharp from foreground all the way to the mountains at infinity. Well, we know the only way we can do that is by focus stacking. So then the question becomes, do I manually focus stack or do I let the camera do it automatically? And it comes down to what's the wind doing. So if we have calm winds like we kind of do right now, and my foreground objects aren't moving, then I'll go ahead and use the automated method or the focus shift shooting because it's easy and it captures them pretty quick. And I know, even though a lot of times I'll have more images than I need, at least I have them. And I can shoot it at my sharpest aperture. So in that case, I would use like f8 for my lens, and then it's going to rattle off, you know, a whole bunch of images and automatically step into the scene and do it for me. If, however, there's any kind of wind that's moving my foreground elements, then I want to make sure that I trip the shutter during those lulls where the wind is calmer and my flowers aren't moving. And in that case, I would stop down at least 1 or 2 stops. So I'd go from, in this case, F8 to maybe F11, possibly F16, and then take a foreground shot, a midground shot, and then a background shot. Your depth of field is shallower the closer your focus point is to the lens. So sometimes I'll take an extra foreground. So I'll focus on my nearest subject, and then I'll shift my focus just a little bit further and focus there for my foreground, and then I'll shoot my midground and then my background. So depending on how far away my subject is from the lens, that'll determine if I take 3, 4, or sometimes 5 images of the scene utilizing the manual focus stacking method. But if it's calm winds, I'll just set it up in the camera and let the camera do it automatically for me. I hope that helps, determining which one to use, and I hope that makes sense. It's really important to know how to do both so that, depending on the conditions, you're ready to go. And that's why it's good to get out here, and practice these things. Even though I don't have, a foreground of flowers in front of me with a beautiful mountains in the back, it's important to practice these techniques so that when you are in front of that scene, you can get the shot and be confident that you got the shot. So I'm currently 4 miles deep into this hike, and I'm not having any luck seeing any decent scenes. So I think we're just going to pick an area of the trail on the way back, and we'll set up focus shift shooting. I'll walk you through that, and then, head back home. Alright guys, so I didn't make it quite as far as I wanted to on the trail. I did find a composition. It's nothing to write home about, but it's definitely, it needs to be focus stacked. So what I've got here is a fallen tree, and a piece of bark has fallen off at the bottom, and you can see that right there. And essentially what I want to do is I want to focus stack from this point right here all the way down into the woods down there. So I've got the composition set up on the back of my camera, and you can see in the bottom left down there, you can see the fallen piece of bark, and I want it sharp from here all the way into the forest. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that your exposure is set the way you want it, and ideally you're shooting in RAW. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to focus on the closest point to your lens. So if we look at the subject down here, we can see, let me tilt up a little bit, we've got a piece of the tree up here, and then we've got the bark down below. If we were thinking about parallel planes coming from the lens element towards our subject, what would it hit first? Well, in this case, it would hit the piece of bark there at the corner. So that's what we're going to focus on. So let's look at the back of the camera again. Okay, so the piece of bark is down in the bottom. Let me control this thing. Bottom left of my frame. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've got my focus point down there, and I've programmed function button 3 to actually zoom to 100%, and you can see I've focused already on that area, and it's super sharp. So before we get started and we dive into the menu, you want to make sure that your settings are set properly for exposure, and you've focused on the closest part of your subject before you dive into the menu. Okay, so next thing you do is you press the menu button, and it's in the photo shooting menu. And when you first press the button, you'll probably be at the top of your menu. To get to focus shift shooting, you just hit the up arrow and that'll take you to the bottom of the photo shooting menu. Okay, from here, you want to select focus shift shooting. And then at the very top, we have start. We'll come back to that. Below that is number of shots. I just select 300. It won't shoot all 300 unless it needs to. But I don't want to stop it early if it's, if it needs the extra shot. So 300 is the max. I just leave it at that and hit OK. And then the focus step width is a scale from 1 to 10. It's something I'm going to do some tests on in the near future. So be looking for a video where I test out the focus step width. But Nikon essentially for landscape photography recommends anything 5 and under. So I'm going to go ahead and use 3 for this, and that typically works. If my foreground subject was a little closer to the lens, I probably would use 2 or 1. But in this case, I think 3 will work fine. So I'm going to select that. And then interval until next shot. If we were shooting macro photography and using a flash that needed to recharge in between each shot, then we could set a time to wait until the next shot to allow that flash to recharge. But in our case, we'll leave that at 0. First frame exposure lock, I leave that on. And then focus position auto reset, I put that to on. Once it is done focus stacking, going all the way to infinity, then it'll reset back to your original focus point just in case you need to do another one. Okay, and then the last setting is starting storage folder. For me, I like to leave that at new folder, and that way all my stacks are in separate folders, and when I'm importing those, I can rename where they're going, and it just helps me keep things organized. You can also put your hand in front of the frame between each focus stack as well and take a shot at the end of a focus stack, put your hand there, take a dark frame, and then start your next one. That works too. Okay, so we're all set to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the menu. I'm going to go up to the top to start, and I'm going to hit start. It says preparing, and there it knocked off a whole bunch of shots. It looks like it took 8. So let's go through these. Always double check your photos when you are done. I'll go ahead and zoom in so we can kind of see. Yeah, looks good. All right, very good. All right, well, that is it. We've captured the images, and hopefully you have a good understanding, or at least a better understanding, of how focus shift shooting works and how focus stacking kind of works in general. Hopefully you'll find better compositions than what I found, but it actually, it's a good place to practice, and I highly recommend that you don't wait until you're in front of that grand vista with the wildflowers in your foreground to actually try these techniques. Make sure you go out in the woods, or you could even do it in your house, and practice these various techniques, and then put them together and pixel peep and see what works, see what doesn't. Anyways, thanks for hanging out with me. Make sure you subscribe. I've got more videos on post-processing of these images, as well as I'm going to do a test on the focus step width, so stay tuned for that. And hey, thanks for hanging out with me in the woods. See you next time. Bye.